He was the seventh among them. And from the day when they fixed days for each other after long arguments and fights, there was no death on his fixed day. 7 weeks had passed when this happened. The day of the week that came in his share, he would arrive at the cemetery early in the morning. All the day he kept hoping someone might die, and his heirs would come to dig the grave. Whenever the loudspeaker sound was heard except for prayer, he would alert, his ears eagerly awaiting an announcement he heard a long time ago. Not hearing the expected announcement, he was disappointed at this moment and began to abuse to the people who had left to die on that specific day. Those with him considered him derogatory, and he himself considered the day that came in his share. He looked at the rest of the co-workers who were making 2 or 3 graves a day, and they were very happy with what they had earned. For the past 7 weeks, there had not been a single grave in his part. He was the oldest of them. He also remembered the days when he was the only grave digger in the cemetery, and people often begged him to dig the grave. He got angry at people who used to dig graves instead of hiring him. But these were all old-fashioned things. He learned this art from his father. After the death of his father, he took over the work as a family heritage and learned more from his father in preparing the graves. He also had a sense of his skill. That is why, even at the time of the burial of the deceased, he would stay nearby, and sometimes one of the people there would say a complimentary phrase on the grave structure, and he would be very happy to hear it. In the same pleasure, he would return some of the fixed amount to the heirs. He specially used to tell his wife about such an incident. His wife could not produce a single offspring. Despite the consolation, it was the grief that his wife was going through, and she died 6 months ago with that grief. Since then, he had lived alone. After his wife's death, he wished that in some way he could pave her grave, and that grave should not be less than the grave of that rich person's wife. There had been rumors about her death for several days, but that rich person had spent so much on his wife's death that everyone's mouths were shut. The work of digging a grave was profitable, and people too got into the profession. Thus, his work gradually became limited. At first, every newcomer grave digger used to get guidance from him to dig the grave. When he understood the task fully separated the old man from his work. 7 weeks ago, every grave digger had refused to be with him. He began to be considered a regular deviant among his peers. There was much discussion among them on this matter. In the same discussion, they set aside days for one another. And the day when the days were fixed, the happiest person was the old man that a full day came in his part. If he even dug a grave on the appointed day, he could spend the rest of his week, as well as save some money, so he could pave his wife's grave. Much of what he had saved in the good days was stolen by the thief 2 months ago. Even the thief had taken the pots from his house. He did not know about the thief. Since then, he only had to spend all the day on the water several times in the last 7 weeks. And it had to be done specially on the day when it was his turn to dig the grave. In other days, he would take some of the goods distributed for the forgiveness of the dead. For the past few days, his cough also started. Coughing overnight made him worse. He took all of his wife's leftover medicines according to his knowledge, but he had no benefit in coughing. And the days were passing just like that. Today was his day again, and it was morning to evening, but no one came to dig the grave. His co-workers wondered what happened to the old man today as he was cleaning the vacant lot beside his wife's grave. One of his peers named Ramadan shouted loudly and started laughing at him. The rest of the grave diggers also laughed at this move and repeatedly shouted at him. These sounds reached his ears, but he did not pay any attention. He didn't even look at them once. Seeing no response from the elder man on their voices, Ramadan got up and lifted a small stone and threw it to the old man, which crashed into the mud of his wife's grave. The dust was also applied to the old man's clothes. This time he turned around and looked at those who were still laughing at a certain distance, but he said nothing. They left the cemetery with a similar laugh, and he continued his work. It was night. The next morning, Ramadan first came to the cemetery. He took a peek and looked at the grave site, and a grave was dug alongside the grave of the elder man's wife. He abused the man who dug this grave on his appointed day. In his anger, he looked around but did not see anyone. "I will fill this grave before anyone comes. I see who digs a grave in my day without me. Maybe it's the work of this old devil. He was working here yesterday. I will dishonor him in front of everyone today." Thinking all this, he walked towards the grave. When reached the edge of the grave, he saw the old man lying down. The soil of the grave had turned red with his blood. His spade had fallen on his head. The old man's eyes were opened. Ramadan felt like the old man was looking at him. Nowhere can I be blamed for this elder's murder. Thinking this, Ramadan ran towards the cemetery's gate. As he ran, he felt the old man's both eyes on his back. He screamed in fear and fell down, colliding with something.